At what point does movement stop being movement and start becoming a weapon? Because I think that's where we are with jumping in Arena Breakout Infinite. Jump around the corner, throw off somebody's aim, and keep your gun on the target, and potentially walk away from the gunfight with the most advantage simply because you decided to leave the ground. And now with the new perk system giving players even more reason to experiment with jump shooting, I think we need to ask a pretty simple question. Should jumping have more consequences in ABI? Let's talk about it. Before we get into it, I want to give a quick shout out to the KZ Gale IEMs, which I've been using a lot this past few months. First off, these things are really lightweight and it genuinely feels like I'm wearing anything at all, which is really nice during these long gaming sessions. They're also really easy to set up. You get the cables you need for both Type-C or USB connections, so whether you're on laptop or PC, you're pretty much good to go. And for the price, I honestly think these are one of the better IEMs I've used so far. I've used IEMs back then when I was still playing in church bands, so there's familiarity with how good these are, and these have been also really good for gaming as well. And a plus is that they're less intrusive on the camera. You guys actually get to see more of my face, my hair, and I don't have to deal with a headset sitting over my ears, trapping the sweat during these hot gaming sessions. So yeah, I've been genuinely enjoying the KZ Gale. If you're looking for a lightweight and affordable IEM for gaming, definitely give these a try, and I provided the link in the description down below. My problem starts when jumping becomes an offensive tool. Because now we're talking about someone sprinting towards a corner, jumping around it, and immediately shooting while they're airborne. And depending on the situation, it can actually give you a pretty big advantage. And this is where I think ABI has a problem. In an extraction shooter, almost every decision you make should come with some kind of a trade-off. You sprint, you're making noise. You carry more gear, you become heavier. You expose your body to take a shot, you're taking the risk to get shot as well. You throw a grenade, you just spend some coins depending on its value. So everything has some kind of a cost. But when you jump into a gunfight, what are you actually giving up? You're changing your vertical position, making yourself harder to track, and you're still able to fight back. That's where I start kind of questioning this mechanic. Because if the benefit of jumping is that I become harder to hit, but the downside is very small, why would I not do it? And then we have this new mastery system they've introduced, and we're specifically pointing towards the jump weapon control perk. This specific perk gives your weapon stability while you're jumping. And I understand the idea. It gives players more ways to refine their playstyle, and that's fine. But it also needs a pretty clear message. Jumping isn't just movement, it's becoming a necessary weapon as part of your gunfights. And the important distinction here is that we're not claiming that the perk makes you perfectly accurate while airborne. The point that we're making here is that it improves the weapon control side of things. When you start rewarding such a behavior, players are naturally going to experiment with it. And if it works, no shit, they're gonna rely on it and they're gonna keep using it. And this is not something I just came up with 5 minutes ago. About a week ago, I made a post asking the ABI community a simple question. Should jumping have more consequences? And the responses were very interesting. A lot of players agreed that jumping should have more weight behind it. Some suggested increased stamina costs. Others wanted stronger accuracy penalties. Some argued that player weight should affect how effectively you can jump and move. And there were also people who just plainly disagreed. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that everybody in ABI is running around bunny hopping in every single fight. Not everybody does this. There are players who genuinely don't think jump shooting is a major problem. Some people barely encounter it. Some people think it's just another skill that you should learn if you want to compete and actually win. And honestly, I understand that argument. If somebody can jump, track me, and kill me, there is some skill involved. But that's not really the question that I'm asking. The question is whether the game is rewarding the right kind of skill. Because yes, you can practice jump shooting, you can get better at it, you can learn when to use it, you can learn how to track somebody while you're moving. I'm not denying any of that. But remember, ABI is an extraction shooter. A huge part of its gameplay comes from positioning, sound, recoil, map knowledge, timing, information, and decision making. And when a movement mechanic allows you to throw up somebody's aim while maintaining a relatively strong ability to shoot back, I have to ask whether the reward is too high for the risk. And here's where it gets even more interesting, because we've talked about this before in a previous video. We had flashlights, grenade spam, and other mechanics that give you a significant advantage just because you're willing to use them. And one of them is also jumping. Jumping can fall into the exact same example. So what happens often with these strategies is they get discovered, they're found effective, and then they're copied, and then they become the meta. So when somebody discovers that jump picking actually works, someone else learns from it and they start doing it, then everybody will do it. And eventually, you're the only person who is not doing it. And at that point, you're the one putting yourself at a disadvantage. And that's when it starts being a problem. Because I already know someone's going to say, then just do it yourself. But that's exactly what I'm talking about. If the answer to a mechanic being too effective is just do it yourself, just copy him, then we've already accepted that the mechanic is part of the meta. So in a way, we're not solving the problem, we're just normalizing it. And I want to make one more thing very clear. I'm not trying to turn ABI into a slow tactical simulator. I find comfort that ABI has this fast pace. I like that you can move, you have aggressive plays. I also like being able to push somebody when you're making a play. I don't want every gunfight to turn into two people sitting behind a wall waiting for the other person to peek. Movement should matter, but movement should also have some consequences. So what should happen? First off, I think the easiest solution is probably some rework with the stamina system. Jumping should cost more stamina, especially if you're repeatedly jumping. If you're constantly bouncing around during a gunfight, you should eventually pay for it. That alone would make people think twice before turning every engagement into a jumping competition. Another option is weapon control. If I'm airborne, my weapon should be harder to control, or less accurate. Not to the point where shooting while jumping becomes completely useless, but enough that it's clearly worse than staying grounded. And from there, it creates a choice. Do I jump and make myself harder to hit? Or do I stay grounded so I can actually shoot someone? And from there, you have a trade-off. You could even add a short recovery penalty after landing. So you jump, you land, and for a brief moment, your weapon control is worse. That would immediately balance out the jump shooting strategy. And I really like this idea for ABI. If I'm wearing a lightweight kit, sure, let me move more freely. But if I'm wearing heavy armor, carrying a massive backpack and enough equipment to supply a small army, maybe I shouldn't be jumping around like I'm made of feathers. Weight should have a more meaningful impact on your movement. And finally, we have to talk about the perk itself. I'm not necessarily saying to remove it because they just added it, but if the developers wanted jumping to primarily be a movement mechanic, why are we specifically rewarding players for being better at shooting while airborne? Maybe the mastery system needs some rework, maybe the benefit needs to be reduced, and maybe it needs a different purpose altogether. And by the way, I don't want this conversation to turn into, well, you can't do that in real life. That's not actually the argument. ABI isn't a military simulator. Still, you have to think it's a video game. I don't care if jump shooting exists. I care about what the mechanic does to the gunfight. Does it create an interesting decision, or does it give me an easy way to gain an advantage just to get a cheap win? And maybe this is actually the bigger conversation we should have about ABI. What kind of game does Morphon actually want this to be? Because we now have jumping, flashlights, grenade spam, movement perks, all of these different mechanics that players can tune into their playstyle. And I'm not saying every single one of them is bad, but I do think the developers need to be careful about what they reward. Because players are always going to rely on what is effective. That's what we do. That's how we're wired. Give us a mechanic that works well, we're going to abuse the fuck out of it. The responsibility is on the game to make sure that the strongest strategies is also a healthy one for the game. So no, I don't think jumping needs to be removed in Arena Breakout Infinite. I don't even think jump shooting necessarily needs to disappear. I just think jumping needs more consequence. If you want to jump around the corner, fine. If you want to use movement to outplay somebody, sure. But you shouldn't get all of the benefits of being harder to track while also maintaining your accuracy. Because I want ABI to reward movement. I want it to reward aggression. I want it to reward good positioning, timing, and decision making. I just don't want the best way to win a gunfight is to be turning yourself into a fucking kangaroo. But yet again, those are only my thoughts about the topic. I'd rather know about yours. Should jumping have more consequences in ABI? Let me know what you think. Leave a comment below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe if you're new here. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you guys in the next one.